Welcome to Beyond the Coverage. I'm Chris Horner, and in this edition, I'd like to cover the Netflix series episodes 1 and 2, Unchained, the Tour de France Unchained. Now, they have 8 episodes total, but I'll cover just the first 2 because they were fairly interesting. Overall, when I'm talking about the Netflix series, keep in mind, I enjoyed it. It was worth watching for certain. The pictures clarity was amazing. You saw a bunch of different videos from angles within the Tour de France that they didn't show us live while I was watching it on the GCN coverage during last year's 2022 edition. So when you got to watch the Netflix series, you got to see a bunch of different angles of film that we just didn't get to see the first time. So for that alone, I really appreciated what Netflix did with the Tour de France Unchained 8 episodes that they just released out on Netflix. But let's get into stages or episodes 1 and episode 2, which will cover stages basically 1 through 5 of last year's Tour de France. Episode 1 was about what I had expected. They covered EF Educations. It was Jonathan Vaughters at the start of episode 1 really talking about the pressure that was put on his team of underperforming before last year's Tour de France started and telling his team riders about how much pressure they need to have on them because the team might fold and disappear. Now we saw with the beginning stage 1 time trial of last year's Tour de France, with that rainy conditions, I think the pressure that Jonathan Vaughters, the owner there of EF Education, the pressure he put on Stefan Bissinger to perform in that first individual time trial was quite high. And of course, we saw Stefan Bissinger crash not once, but twice during the individual first stage of the Tour de France. Now, I thought if I was the director sportif sitting in the car after the first crash, at that point in time, on such a short time trial, individual time trial on stage 1, it's over. There's no chance of winning. At that moment, I'm telling my rider, Stefan Bissinger, hey, that's it. Relax, save the legs, just finish the stage off, and let's worry about stages 2, 3, 4, and 5 to try to win something here for EF Education. Instead, they put a little more pressure, and Stefan Bissinger crashed twice before the end of stage 1 individual time trial. Now, the next team they cover is Soudal Quickstep. This I would have liked a little bit more because, of course, it was Yves Lampaert that won stage 1, and he did a fantastic individual time trial, hung it out there on the wet and slippery roads, and took the victory to start the race at the Tour de France wearing the race leader's yellow jersey for the next stage. The next stage was a sprinter stage, and this was going to be the big highlighting stage for Fabio Jakobsen. When you're watching the episode, what they're forgetting to bring in, though, I would have liked to seen a little bit of the year before when Mark Cavendish was winning stages left and right in the Tour de France. And I would have liked to seen the connection of the story between Mark Cavendish being left out of last year's edition of the Tour de France and Fabio Jakobsen being brought in. They kind of left that part out. They talked about, of course, Patrick Lefevere being put under a little bit of pressure of having to decide which rider started last year's Tour de France. And so the victory on stage 2, backing up the victory on stage 1 from Yves Lampaert, of course, took a lot of pressure off of Patrick Lefevere. But when you're watching episode 1, you have to remember, sometimes they're leaving out some important details. I think the race could have looked a little bit more gritty and had a little more substance to episode 1 of Unchained if they would have really highlighted a little bit of Mark Cavendish and the reason why he was left off the team instead of just showing the victories. And of course, that allowed Patrick Lefevere to be able to go, hey, I did everything right and I picked it and won it. But when I'm sitting there on the Chesterfield, I'm still thinking, well, Mark Cavendish was in great form before the Tour de France started last year when he won the British National Road Championships, and he came from the Giro where he won a stage at the Giro. So what I'm really thinking is you could have got a little bit more gritty into the Netflix series if you would have showed how good of form that Mark Cavendish was in and what they possibly could have won at the last year's Tour de France if Mark Cavendish had come. Because remember, if he breaks the record, the Eddie Merckx 35 stage victory records, he's tied with him right now. So one stage win in last year's edition, Mark Cavendish would have been the outright winner or leader of the most individual stages at the Tour de France ever in the history. So they kind of hide it, right? You kind of see Yves Lampaert win stage 1. You see Fabio Jakobsen win stage 2. And then, of course, in the episode, you see Patrick Lefevere smiling and telling everyone that he must have done the right decision. Well, it looks easy that way when you win 2 stages. But remember, sometimes what you're forgetting, if Mark Cavendish had come and won a stage, then he has broken the all-time record. So they leave out a little bit of details. Another thing with EF education, when we're talking about just the individual time trial ride of Stefan Bissinger, I would have liked the Netflix series to cover a little bit more of stage 5. Remember when Nielsen Palace was up the road, almost took the race leader's yellow jersey at the Tour de France on stage 5 of the cobblestones, but there was a little deal being made back there by Alberto Bettiol, talking it up with Tadej Pogacar, trying to get the Slovenian to really start picking up the pace. And basically, I believe, telling Tadej Pogacar that if you go hard, I'll work with you. And they do a little bit of work there on stage 5. And then Nielsen Palace loses the race leader's Tour de France jersey for the United States. That would have been a good topic to cover on episode 1. But all in all, I still appreciated that Netflix put on the series and enjoyed episode 1. We get into episode 2, and this is what I really wanted to see, right? Of course, it was Wout van Aert, Jonas Vingegaard, and then Primoz Roglic that are the 3 leaders for Jumbo-Visma. Now, I was working for NBC last year. I won't be working for NBC this year. For whatever reason, they don't tell you. They just fire you at NBC and say, when we fire you, we don't give you any reason of why we're firing you. We just tell you we don't want you anymore. So this year, I'll be working just up here at the Butterfly Effect. But I remember a lot of times last year when we're talking about stage 5 on the cobblestones that I always brought up with their director sportif, Grisha Nierman, that I said before in the interview, before last year's Tour de France, I really talked them and tried to drill them on stage 5 of the cobblestones. What would Wout van Aert do? What would he do on stage 1? That's easy. He's open. What would he do on stage 2 if there got to be crosswinds and something got dangerous? Would he give up a shot at winning the race leader's yellow jersey and the stage to go back and help Jonas Vingegaard and, of course, Primoz Roglic? That's stage 2. Stage 3, I asked them the same question. Stage 4, I asked them the same question. And then really when we got into stage 5, before the race even had started at the Tour de France, this was probably 7-10 days before the Tour de France started proper, when the NBC commentators got to interview all of the directors, I really tried pinning down Grisha multiple times of what Wout van Aert would do on stage 5. So when episode 2 of Unchained comes out and they start talking about Jumbo-Visma, I start perking up. Episode 1 was interesting. I enjoyed it. But episode 2 was what I really wanted to see because it was all about Jumbo-Visma and how their tactics played out through stages 1 through 5 and ending with the cobblestones. Now, we get into stage 4. We know Wout van Aert came up short in the individual time trial, came up short on stage 2, but did take the race leader's yellow jersey, came up short on stage 3, and now I went into stage 4. Now, I said, covering it on the Butterfly Effect, and I was talking about it when I was working for NBC on studio, that really the topic I wanted to talk about after stage 4 was Wout van Aert leaving Jonas Vingegaard back there all on his own, when if he had backed off just the throttle a little bit, he would have went over the top of that final climb on stage 4. He would have had Jonas Vingegaard, he would have had Yates from Ineos there, and the 3 riders would have went into the finish, and of course, gained time on Tadej Pogacar. We see in episode 2, before the race started, Grisha Nierman, the director sportif for Jumbo-Visma, says he wants everybody to stay together on this stage, and of course, Wout goes up solo. After the finish, with Wout flapping his wings, because Red Bull gives you wings, we see that Tadej Pogacar's on the roll, on the trainers, warming down. Wout van Aert goes by and basically taps Tadej Pogacar on the shoulder and says, "Hey, I surprised you a little bit, right?" Well, Tadej Pogacar smiles back at him and says, "Well, at least you dropped all your teammates for me. I guess that was lucky on my side that you went up the road solo," is what he's talking about. That was the main thing I wanted to see out of episode 2 of Unchained, how the chemistry in the team between Jonas, Primoz Roglic, and Wout van Aert was after stage 4 of last year's Tour de France. So you see a little bit of tension when you're watching the Netflix series between Jonas Vingegaard and Wout van Aert. And this would always be what you would expect between riders and teammates when you have a rider like Wout van Aert whose sole objective when he's starting the Tour de France is to win stages. He's going to look at green jerseys. He's going to look at wearing the race leader's yellow jersey for a stage or 2 if he can early in the week. But where's his priorities when it comes to the general classification? If you guys have been fans of the Butterfly Effect, you know before last year's Tour de France, I had highlighted this topic many times. So, of course, when the Netflix series came out, this is when I'm perking up. You see Jonas Vingegaard's upset during the Netflix series a little bit with Wout van Aert, and Wout van Aert is trying to downplay it just a little bit. But every time when I've been on teams and I've seen these kind of characteristics happen between the chemistry of riders on big teams, you know there's always going to be a little tension here, and I think that was a massive mistake from Wout van Aert. Of course, the Netflix series covered it just a little bit, but not as much as I would have liked to have seen, because you definitely hear with the director sportif, Grisha Neerman, while Wout van Aert sitting on the table, he's telling him when he's getting a massage that he should have waited for Jonas Vingegaard to come back on that stage. So you know there's a little pressure for Wout van Aert to fall in line. And before last year's Tour de France, during those interviews with the Jumbo-Visma director sportif, I asked him specifically, is Wout van Aert's number one goal to look after Jonas and Primoz Roglic at the Tour de France, or is his number one goal going to be winning stages and taking the race leader's yellow jersey? And he never really answered it. I got a little bit of pressure from NBC exec that they didn't really like me using up our time trying to talk tactics, but I knew when we were covering the race live for NBC that these tactics from stages 1 all the way to 5 would be the highlight story that I'd want to talk about up there behind the desk on NBC. So when I get to finally see on the Netflix series the tension that's brought between the two riders, it was basically one of the highlights of watching episode 2. Now, we get a little deeper into episode 2 and you get into the cobblestone stage. This was very interesting because when I covered stage 5, I talked about many times how I would not like to have had Wout van Aert as my teammate with Jumbo-Visma when you have the quality of riders they got that they can pick that are sitting at home to replace Wout van Aert. Many times the comments at home said, hey, Wout van Aert, he should be allowed to go win stages. Of course, you saw me up on NBC, if you watched that coverage, argue with Bob Roll many times through last year's Tour de France that Wout van Aert is doing too much for himself and not enough for the general classification. We get into this stage in the Netflix series, and of course, we see all the chaos that's happened around Jonas Vingegaard when he has the bike issue with the chain getting sucked up when he has to switch to Nathan Van Hooydunk's bike, then switch over to Steven Kruijswijk's bike, then switch back over to the mechanic bringing the bike off to the top of the car, and you see the chaos. At that point in time, you see Wout van Aert ride right past Jonas Vingegaard there and leaving him back there with other teammates. Now, later in the series, in the Netflix series, episode 2, we see Wout van Aert come back and get Jonas Vingegaard after the crash later happens with Primoz Roglic too. So both the leaders back there were kind of dangling off the back until Wout van Aert finally goes back and saves the day for Jonas Vingegaard. Now, if I'm the director for the Netflix series, the way I would have covered this, really, what I wanted to know is if Wout van Aert was in the front group with a shot to win the Paris-Roubaix stage on the cobblestone, stage 5 of last year's Tour de France, if he was in the front, capable of catching that breakaway that stayed off to the line, if he was in the front, capable of a shot at winning the stage and adding more time with the race leader's yellow jersey on, would he have then dropped back for Jonas Vingegaard and Primoz Roglic, or would he have stayed in the front? Now, you can say many times, I had this question on the butterfly effect after stage 5, where people drilled me and said, Wout van Aert is the perfect teammate. Well, he wasn't so perfect on stage 4, and we see that in the Netflix series with the arguing between Jonas and Wout, discussions there about how they should have waited at the top of that climb on stage 4 with about 12 kilometers to go. Stage 5, you see in the series that Wout van Aert, and of course we saw it live during the Tour de France, that Wout van Aert goes back and saves the day, keeps the gap between Tadej Pogačar, who's up front, finished 12th, 13th on the stage, and lost some time, of course, to the breakaway guys, but finished way ahead, about 13 seconds, up on Jonas Vingegaard, but way, way ahead on time on Primoz Roglic. So overall, it was a positive day, but would the big guy, Wout van Aert, if he had a shot at winning stage 5, would he have then dropped back? Because remember, Wout van Aert crashed early in that stage 5, then later in interviews said he was a bit scared in the rest of the stage, that's why he was hanging back. And of course, he's already lost the stage, he's probably already believing he's going to lose the race leader's yellow jersey, so why not go back for Jonas Vingegaard back there and try to salvage something on the general classification if everything else is given away? Now, there is one moment in episode 2, Grisha Nierman, again, the director sportif for Jumbo-Visma, he says, if I asked 100% of the GC riders out there that are racing to try to win the Tour de France, who would be their number one teammate to have at the Tour de France, all of them, I believe, would have said Wout van Aert. Well, I've won a Grand Tour before, and I said last year before the butterfly effect that having Wout van Aert on my team, racing stage 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 for himself is not an ideal teammate to have, especially when you have a team like Jumbo-Visma and you can pick other quality riders that on that stage 5 of the cobblestone stage could have looked after Jonas Vingegaard and Primoz Roglic to avoided both of those incidents that they had and kept them closer to Tadej Pogacar. So when the Slovenian was attacking, going up the road and crossing the finish line about 13th, about 51 seconds back on the original stage winner there, Simon Clark, and Taco van der Hoorn second. When you look at that, I think, sitting up on the butterfly effect and here on Beyond the Coverage, that if you had a different rider than Wout van Aert, who wasn't trying to win stage 5 already from the beginning of that stage, those two riders probably would have never been in that situation to begin with. And certainly Primoz Roglic crashing through the roundabout with the hay bale would have been at the front because a strong rider would have kept him going through that roundabout in a perfect position. You would have finished stage 5 on the same time as Tadej Pogacar, and you would have had Primoz Roglic still up there in the general classification, and Jonas Vingegaard would have still been there right next to Tadej Pogacar finishing that stage. A lot of guys drilled me saying, hey, Wout was a consummate professional here doing the teamwork duties for Jonas Vingegaard. But you got to ask yourself, would Wout van Aert had dropped out of the front group and gone back for his leaders if he had a shot at winning stage 5 and, of course, extending the race leader's yellow jersey? That was the only thing that the Netflix episode 2 airing really missed for me while I was sitting on the couch watching it, was give me a little bit more, get a little bit more gritty in there. Don't show me what happened. We know what happened because we watched stage 5. Show us what we missed on stage 5 of the camera and go a little bit deeper into the team chemistry of how it looked after stage 5, stage 4, stage 3, 2, and of course 1. That would have been a little bit more ideal, but all in all, like I said, if you get a chance to watch the Tour de France Netflix series Unchained, go ahead, spend the time, sit on the Chesterfield, grab yourself some treats, and enjoy the 8 episodes from Netflix Unchained. Like and subscribe. I'll see you guys on the next edition real soon.